Right, I think we will kick off this evening. So once again, thank you very much to everyone who joined. I think we will probably have more people join as we kick off, but because we have such a high level and brilliant panel on board, I wouldn't want to keep them waiting any longer. So let's begin. Today we are here for the second part in the series of events that CAMCO has co-organized together with the 2X Collaborative that are called Putting Women in the Spotlight. Some of you might have attended the first part or the first event, regional event, which focused on sub-Saharan Africa, which took place back in February, where we discussed specifically the 2X criteria 4, which is focused on women as end users and customers within the energy space. Today, as you know, we are focusing on a very different geographical region, countries with a very different needs and different barriers to empowering women, and that is the small island developing states. And we have also expanded the focus of the event to cover all 4 of the 2X gender lens investing criteria. So we will focus on how to empower women to be leaders in driving the energy transition, how to ensure that we have women working in the sector, and how to ensure that we are as well targeting women as customers and end users of sustainable energy. The event, as mentioned, has been organized jointly by CAMCO, Clean Energy. CAMCO is a climate and impact fund manager and a Green Climate Fund accredited entity. We have been very passionate about mainstreaming gender across our activities and also within our organization. And you might be familiar with some of the funding facilities that CAMCO is managing that include the Renewable Energy Performance Platform, or REP, operating in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as the Spark Fund for commercial and industrial solar and energy efficiency also in Africa, as well as the new TIDES facility that we are establishing specifically for the Pacifics, and also our work in the Caribbean region. And I'll leave for my colleagues to also explain more about how the 2X network works. But without further ado, just to run you through the structure of the event tonight. So after this short introduction and welcome, we will go straight into the keynote address, which will be followed by a panel discussion. After the panel discussion, we hope to engage with you in a more interactive discussion. Everything this time will take place on the Teams platform, so you don't have to go anywhere for those who may have attended the past event where we used a slightly different approach. And we hope that everything will be straightforward, and we hope that you will enjoy the discussion and find it enlightening, and also will be actively sharing your experiences with us. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the keynote speaker of this event tonight. And this is His Excellency Ambassador Chad Blackman. Mr. Chad Blackman is the ambassador and permanent representative of Barbados to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, Vienna, and Rome. He is also Barbados ambassador to Austria, the Republic of Serbia, and Switzerland. Ambassador Blackman has worked in the international development sector for over 15 years and has engaged as an international trade law specialist and development consultant at the Commonwealth Secretariat. Prior to his tenure in Geneva, he was legal consultant and partner in a Caribbean law firm, where he has led on issues of international trade, shipping, and data protection laws. Ambassador Blackman is the president of the G77 in China, the Geneva chapter, a former chair for the Trade and Environment Committee, and the former chair for the Trade and Development Committee, both within the World Trade Organization. Most importantly, for this discussion tonight, Mr. Blackman chairs the SIDS group of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the UNCTAD. He is the coordinator of the CARICOM group, and he was the Americas coordinator for the government group in the ILO. And he is the UN International Gender Champion Global Board member, which I think we are really delighted to have him with us tonight. And I would really like to hand over to His Excellency, Mr. Blackman, without further ado, for his keynote address right now. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, very well.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much, Chair, for such a very extensive introduction. But it's certainly very good to be with you and, of course, all of our invited guests from around the world. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear friends and colleagues, wherever you may be. At the outset, I'd really like to thank you for organizing this timely event. I'm particularly privileged to be invited to deliver the keynote address. What is both very timely and ever relevant discussion and forum. I therefore commend you, the organizers, for having this at such a time. To my mind, there can be no doubt that on every policymaker's mind today, given the climate crisis reality and also the negative impact on gender, social and economic parity around the globe, particularly in developing countries, and even within that subset, focusing on smaller and developing states. Recent studies by the international and regional institutions have revealed are most vulnerable to the climate crisis. The United Nations Development Programme estimates that around 80%, that's correct, a staggering 80% of people being displaced by climate change are women. Friends and colleagues, therefore, it is within this context that I truly believe that we also must absolutely increase the global awareness of the importance of addressing the needs of women as customers, energy sector employees and leaders, and of course, key players in building SIDS resilience to the climate crisis. The time for action is now. I cannot underscore that enough. Let me also share some perspectives on how I think we could collectively step towards ensuring that women are in the spotlight and also closing the gender gap in the SIDS renewable energy sector. Firstly, we must ensure that women play a key role in developing SIDS renewable energy sectors by bringing them to the table and listening to their voices. We must empower more women in SIDS to take part in this discourse at the executive and management levels. Now, I want to stick a pin there. In order for us to get to that stage, there are a number of things that we have to do, because it's all well and good for us to say we have to have women at the table, they must take up their place. But if we don't create the conditions that would lead them to that place, whether it be through education, capacity building, financing, then that would just become a very lofty ideal. So the architecture leading up to that point must also be working hand in hand. One of our priorities, therefore, is to equip women with the right tools, enabling technology and technical knowledge needed to gain access to the energy sector and to provide them a platform to shape the SIDS narrative towards building the island's resilience to the climate crisis. Secondly, the 5th United Nations Sustainable Development Goal focuses on gender equality, and this is particularly important. Now, this goal is the core to the development in the SIDS. It is for this reason, therefore, that we urgently need to design or perhaps redesign public-private partnerships with clear objectives on closing gender gaps in the energy sector. And it goes without saying that pursuing such gender parity initiatives at a regional level will unleash the economic potential of SIDS and also put women at the center of building the island's resilience to climate change. So, importantly, we must foster collaboration among SIDS towards this end. And this is going to be very important as we go forward with this type of idea, because partnerships will drive a number of things. It will widen the opportunity pool. It would also allow for persons to share their knowledge and best practices. And that really, as I said, is really the unleashing of the potential that we are seeking to achieve here. Now, thirdly, improving gender balance has proven to stimulate innovation, enhance financial performance, also improving development outcomes and resulting in convivial and safer working environments. Now, according to the Energy Sector Management System Program, companies with greater gender equality are more innovative, generous, and ultimately, of course, from a private sector perspective, more profitable. We must therefore take necessary action to further advance gender equality and inclusivity across the energy sector workforce in small and developing states. Now, one critical step towards this end could be to initiate a gender equality and inclusivity audit in the energy sector across SIDS. Now, I know we're focusing on SIDS, but if it doesn't exist even further, I also think that throughout the entire developing country landscape, it is something that could be done or should be done. Now, such an audit could shed light on the realities on the ground and contribute towards specific gender-responsive programs and actions needed to end all forms of discrimination against women, both as employees and as leaders in this important sector. And dare I say that there should be a mix of persons, well, a big mix of men and women who also create and undertake this audit, so that there's also a level of inclusivity, and we ensure therefore that there's no discrimination even in the analysis or in the bias that you would normally have sometimes in reports, unfortunately. Now, having said that, we must be realistic and admit that there are several hurdles to these objectives. I just hinted at one of them. But the good news is that these hurdles are mostly surmountable. Now, in the interest of time, I would only highlight one example. One of the main challenges for women in SIDS is difficulties in raising finance to start a business. Now, according to the Inter-American Development Bank in Latin America and the Caribbean, only 1% of female entrepreneurs have access to seed capital, angel investors, and venture capital funds, while 7% of men have access to this type of capital. So we see the disparity already. Now, coincidentally, these are the three sources of funding that can enable a business idea to become a reality. It is therefore incumbent on us to upgrade our regulatory and entrepreneurial frameworks and financial institutions to ensure that women are granted equal access to more diverse sources of funding. Now, I must highlight the fact then that financing is going to be critical, not just from the banking sector, but also in the age of ensuring that we have a situation where there's a plethora of opportunities for financing. Traditional institutions must also come on board with new institutions in ensuring that we have all of the wider institutions coming on board in accessing and delivering for our women in terms of trade. There must be a new ethos, a new thinking, a new level of engagement relative to how we treat these things. Okay. Now, I really like to say that achieving gender equality is a collective responsibility. There's no one player, there's no one stakeholder, there's no one government, there's no one private sector entity or group of companies or civil society who must carry that burden. All of the above invariably has to carry that burden. And gender equality will only be achieved if we all play our part. As cliché as it has become, it is still true. Gender equality, therefore, must be achieved when everyone makes the right policy choices, and ultimately the decisions can be held accountable to the decisions that are advanced and made. And gender equality will only be achieved, if I say so, if we take concerted actions to implement the decisions as well. So therefore, let me conclude by urging all heads of organizations, institutions, not only attend this event, but in the wider international community, and also to join the International Gender Champions movement in advancing not only the cause of women, but ensuring that discrimination is no longer on our landscape and that we can truly have meaningful participation for women and girls around the world. I really want to wish all of you a very productive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this brilliant address. Sorry, I can hear a lot of echo. Yeah, no, that's better now. You not only highlighted the importance of really ensuring that women are at the table to drive the energy transition in the SIDS, but also went on to highlight some of the important aspects that I think we will try to touch upon in the discussion today, whether it's the challenges that prevent at the moment women from fully benefiting from climate finance opportunities, or just simply from being in leadership positions to drive the strategy for this change that's needed in the energy sector, and also some of the solutions, as you suggested. So I really hope that we can delve into some of them in the discussion that follows. Most importantly, I think I really like that at the end you stress the importance of partnerships and having the different stakeholders at the table. And this leads me, I think, very well to the introduction of the next segment of the session today, which is our roundtable discussion, where we have a brilliant panel of speakers coming from the side of developers, the side of financiers and experts as well. and it will be chaired by our wonderful Nicole Pitter-Patterson, who is the co-lead of board diversity at the 2X Collaborative, and will moderate the discussion today. And I hope we'll introduce the panel in much great detail. So Nicole, over to you, and let's kick off the discussion.
Thank you for that, Yeva, and thank you for framing the discussion, Ambassador. Very much so. So is everybody hearing me without any reverb? I'm hearing a little bit of. So my work today is to take us into having a panel discussion with colleagues. We have Laura Latti, who is the impact manager of Camco, who is with us. Laura, you can just do a...
Hello, yes, hi everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening.
Right, thank you very much, Laura. We also have Angela Rainford, who is the founder of Saleco and Recamnia Frontier Ventures.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And we have Belinda Strid, who is an off-grid solar systems entrepreneur from Vanuatu, who is into tomorrow and already committed to being with us.
Good morning.
Thank you. Welcome to you, Belinda. And last but certainly not least, we have Inka Schomer, who is with us, and Inka is a gender and infrastructure advisor working in the SIDS and the Pacific region. So I'm going to give you a little bit more information about some of our speakers. Welcome, Inka. Are you already also into tomorrow?
No, I am not.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with having a discussion with our panelists. I know we have a little bit amount of time. I would ask each of those the various participants to just make your notes in terms of your questions and your key points that you want to discuss. We're going to try and get through the discussion as much as possible. As Yeva mentioned, I am Nicole Pitter-Patterson. I am the 2X Collaborative co-lead for board diversity. I'm very, very excited and happy to be here speaking to this very, very important issue. So I'm going to start with Inka with regards to looking and assessing the current state of play. You have some extensive experience in advising various sector stakeholders, as well as contributing to the development of the global knowledge base vis-a-vis closing the gender gap in the energy sector. And what would be interesting to hear from you on the other side in terms of, the dynamics in the island states on the Pacific is where do you currently see the key challenges to addressing gender equality in the Pacific?
Thank you for that question. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be building on the brilliant words that we've already heard, which were point on in terms of the issues that we see in the work that we all do. And it will certainly be really interesting to have everyone come in on these issues. I particularly like the call for it to be a collective effort. I always say on gender equality, it's not too crowded. With that, I'm going to give you a bit of background on what I've been working on. I've spent the last 2 years working across the Pacific on gender issues, particularly the emergency response in terms of financing to sectors such as tourism, but also working on transport and gender equality issues. Through that work, which was really interesting, is that the gender gaps we knew about just became very, very clear. For example, looking at the pension payouts that people could draw from earlier to float their businesses or support their livelihoods, you really then see what the impact is when women step out of a career or are paid less over the years. I also, in my previous role as the lead on gender and energy at the World Bank, led the establishment and negotiation of a gender and SIDS grant under a climate facility. So with that worked across the different SIDS countries to get the financing that this work would happen. My passion personally is always to make sure that there's funding for the the commitments in word to get people, to get infrastructure, and the legwork on the ground, particularly local experts to come in and guide that thinking. So I'm going to talk about some of the barriers that I think are fundamental to driving the gaps in the energy sector. We know that the majority of formal businesses are owned and controlled by men. We also know that women's leadership is lagging. So the women business and the law data really points to that. Countries such as Kiribati, Tonga, and the federal states of Micronesia are still really lagging behind on those legislative reforms that you need to close those gaps. And just a caveat, I will be speaking to the Pacific today, so it'll be great to hear others come in on other SIDS. On the boards of directors, we know from Fortune 500 countries, Fortune 500 companies that gap is closing. So it used to be 1.2% to 22.2%, but in the Pacific, the Asia Pacific region, that still sits at 15.1%. And we know that leadership, role modeling, the sense of agency comes from people in those positions that look like us, that are similar to us. So I think there's also this I worked on a project on boards in PNG, and there's a strong inertia in terms of the selection bias with and also setting requirements that you have to have been a previous CEO to be on a board, and that's really setting up those pipelines and that talent. Other issues we see is in terms of women's constraint in terms of control of assets such as land, their inherent local practices on inheritance law. For example, in the Republic of Marshall Islands, there's still no laws entitling women to maternity leave, either paid or unpaid, and the conversation on paternity leave has not, or just parental leave has not been taken forward. The Pacific also has one of the lowest rates of women in parliament. The global average is about 24%, and the Pacific sits at about 15%. In the energy sector, something that often doesn't get talked about a lot, it's more in sectors such as health and education, where gender-based violence is really talked about. But there's such a business case. If you're going to talk about entrepreneurship, you're going to talk about employment, you have to look this issue in the face. You're not going to, and this has benefits for both women and men in terms of, and others in terms of really, you have decrease in absenteeism, presenteeism. Studies by the IFC really show that you can actually quantify this. So a study across 3 companies, showed cost of 10 days of work lost per employee based on gender-based violence, domestic violence, etc., and that being $2.5 million US dollars of revenue lost. So the renewable energy sector needs to be cognizant and really set up those processes to respond to those issues, but also realize that they probably already have this problem in ministries and utilities and in energy companies on the ground, and that if you're going to work on addressing those gender gaps, you need to look at those issues. I'm going to just touch on some of the impacts of COVID, which I think are really interesting. We saw those gaps increasing. So there's high frequency surveys that showed that nearly 28% of women who were employed before COVID-19 lost their jobs compared to 19% of men. So that goes again to the fact that women were in or are in harder hit sectors such as accommodation, entertainment, and tourism. So thinking through also the crossover opportunities for women to move from lower paying sectors, but also the entrepreneurship opportunities that they're engaged in based on cultural norms, expectations in terms of moving to those sectors. And I think given that there's a 70% energy access deficit in the Pacific, there's a lot of investments going in from the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and others that could be leveraged to look at that. And at the same time, there's infrastructure that needs upgrading to enable the grid to support those investments in renewables. So there's a 2-pronged opportunity there in terms of where the sector is going. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, that really sounds excellent, Inka. Thank you so much, because you've highlighted not only some of the challenges, but also very clearly right away some of the opportunities for engagement. Thank you so much for that. Well, I want to bring in now in the discussion Belinda, who, as we mentioned, Belinda Strid is the owner-manager at PCS Limited and president of the Sustainable Energy Industry Association of the Pacific Islands, CIP? Close.
CIP, yes.
CIP.
Yes.
Okay, got it. So you're a renewable energy entrepreneur, starting off with looking at off-grid solar systems. And so what we want to welcome you to the floor and the discussion, Belinda, is to tell us, a bit about your experience in implementing renewable energy initiatives in the Pacific. What are some of the challenges that you have encountered as a female entrepreneur? We heard Inka mention some of the issues with regards to limited access to finance, and basically maybe not as how can we say this diplomatically, not as enticing and enabling environment. How have you been able to approach and provide opportunities for female customers, and what challenges have you identified? So the floor is yours, Belinda.
Thank you, Nicole. Sorry, I think the biggest problem in Vanuatu is education. I've been here for 15 years. When I arrived, we built the second telecommunications network when we first arrived over those 5 years. With the telecommunications network, we now have a couple of hundred towers within Vanuatu comparative to around 30 or 40. So we're now hitting more than 80% of the islands have now got access to communications. With communications and mobile phones, people needed power so that they could power their phones. This has then been able to educate people. When we first started building these towers, regardless of gender, we would pay people weekly. So you may come and you will dig a hole so we can do a concrete foundation. Of the 10 people, 2 out of 10 could write their own name to receive their cash payment. That was regardless of gender. What we have found with communications is that people want to text and message and use social media. So therefore now there is much more literacy, regardless of age group. People have learnt to read at 20, at 25, at 30. This is not so much of a gender thing, but with that and the communications, we've now been able to educate people and therefore get the message out. The women have been able to talk to each other. Those with solar systems have been able to go, I have a solar system. I can now communicate. I can now learn, this is what's happening politically. So they're getting more of a voice. Previously, it's very culturally in Vanuatu, particularly within a lot of the Pacific Islands, the men are the leaders and the women are just there to be quiet and to do the gardening. With that voice that the communications has allowed, which must have power, they've been able to then get involved politically, look at small business, learn new trades, and start adjusting the mentality. I asked my staff to ring around a few of the mini grids that we've recently done. So these islands that had no power 3 years ago, and we've done 3 small mini grids, and they now have power throughout the entire village. I just was thinking of the numbers. So in Southwest Bay, there is 150 houses, buildings, schools. Of the 2 people that manage and maintain the system there, 1 is a woman and 1 is a man. In Lelepa Island, which is another one, 1 is a woman, 1 is a man. So this is great for gender equality. Yes, that we've been able to achieve this. The 3rd one will actually turn on in the next month or so. So we will see what the mix is that comes forward. And they're actually put up by the community. The community will have a cooperative that will then go, they are good, honest, reliable, smart, instead of gender specific. So this is, not so much on this topic, but it is good that they're now identifying and moving past those cultural differences. As an entrepreneur in Vanuatu and in life, I've been very fortunate that I don't believe I've really experienced any problems with gender or being put back. Having said that, though, I am educated. I am an engineer. I was a tradie first. So electronics technician, decided that the designs I was getting to implement were not good enough. So became an engineer so I could do my design. So having been a tradie and now an engineer and now a manager, I've got a pretty good understanding across the board. I think with that, though, is I've grown the skills, like from a young woman, and age through. So I haven't really had a problem with the gender specific issues. But like I said, I am educated and I have been able to, do your own research so you're confident as well in your abilities and you're able to put those out there. Within our organisation at PCS, it's then also making sure that my team is educated, that they're confident, that they understand what they're talking about and then can impart that knowledge. I'm just going to give you a small quote from, I asked Florina to have a quick chat, one of our project manager. Let me just find. I said, how do we encourage women to want to become electricians or engineers? And she said, we have to encourage women not to have the mentality that only boys can become electricians and engineers, but women too can become these. We need to follow what women see or think it's best to do and will help solve problems. I thought that was really interesting, and I think it's very, very true. We have a lot of education to go within Vanuatu and the rest of the Pacific Islands. It's to stop limiting ourselves. And I think that's a really important part as we keep moving through, is to stop limiting ourselves. It's not about gender. It's, I can do it too. Don't pigeonhole yourself before you've even begun.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Belinda. So what you're saying is that there's a paradigm shift that's actually taking place, because in two of those situations, it was actually 50% of the, let's say, management team, if you want to call it that, within these various villages that were managing and leading in terms of the off-grid opportunities. Thank you. So what's interesting about this discussion that CAMCO and 2X has put together is that we get to hear from not just the entities like Belinda, we're hearing both sides. We're hearing both from those who are doing off-grid, smaller community-based initiatives and businesses. And then we also get the opportunity to hear from dynamos on the other side, in addition to Belinda and Florina that she mentioned, like Angela Rainford. Welcome, Angela. Angela is a founder of Salico and Recamnier, which I hope I can say I actually...
You've done really well. Most people don't get it the first time around.
It's Rainmaker. I got it. Recamnier. Frontier Ventures, which co-developed one of the largest solar plants in the Caribbean, in Jamaica. Prior to this, Angela worked at Goldman Sachs in merchant banking, and she is really committed and leading on bringing these renewable energy opportunities, not just I think around the world, I think is what we've been seeing that you've been doing, Angela. So what we would like to speak to you about on the other side of this discussion, Angela, is how, recognizing that your company is what we will call 2X aligned. So, as one of the co-sponsors of this initiative today, there are a number of 2X looking at gender lens considerations. And what we're seeing is that from what you've been able to receive in terms of very successful investment from entities, you know, including Deatkin, Impact, including Inter-American Development Bank. Could you tell us a little bit about your path in terms of achieving the requirements and meeting the requirements of these investors in your work that you've been doing to receive what we refer to as 2X aligned funding to ensure that you you know, are bringing achieving some of these gender focus initiatives.
Sure. Well, I guess just no, I appreciate the question, Nicole. So just, I guess, to kick off, so clearly we've developed utility scale projects, but the funding that we've recently closed with the IDB is actually geared towards what we view as distributed power. So that's a commercial and industrial market segment. So we signed actually New Year's Eve, so I didn't have much of a Christmas or a New Year's. So we signed with the IDB. We raised 24 million from the IDB basically to do our first initial set of portfolio projects with a CNI strategy. So in the Caribbean, which is where I'm representing, so it's nice to hear from what's happening in the Pacific Islands. So in the Caribbean, basically, there's increasing, you know, utility scale projects have been developed more or less, and they're increasingly being developed. But the CNI part of the market is very much nascent. So that's where large industrial customers or commercial customers decide to bring on board renewable energy into their energy mix, primarily for self-consumption, not necessarily to inject it into the grid. And so we raised funding from both Deatkin, which is an impact investment fund based out of Canada, and also women-led, Alexa Bain, who's one of the main funders there. And we also raised money from the IDB, specifically IDB Invest. So what they've done around gender is really interesting. So I'll speak a little bit about the IDB facility and then also about Deatkin and how they've blended that into, you know, kind of encouraging us to adapt more of that gender lens and meeting certain gender objectives. So the IDB, part of the reason why they funded the initiative is obviously because of the economics, but it doesn't hurt being a female founder, which is nice to see that being an advantage for a change rather than being a disadvantage. I know Ambassador Chadman kind of spoke to the very dire percentage of venture capital that goes to female founders. But what they've done is they've set milestones for us. So they said, look, the interest rate to your debt is this level if you do nothing, and it's this level if you achieve these various milestones. And so what we have is basically a ratcheted interest rate structure, which is very interesting. And it's actually quite interesting for other DFIs as well to maybe look at this and see if they can include in their mix. But what they've done is they've given us a series of milestones. So one of the milestones is that when we construct projects, because I guess taking a step back, what do we do as developers? We develop, we finance, we build, we construct, and we own and operate solar assets and energy storage assets in the Caribbean. So when we're going through the construction phase, we're required to meet a certain percent of female participation in the workforce. And the higher that participation is, the lower our interest rate. So basically, they are paying us to ensure that we achieve these goals. And so what we do is we try to encourage that in our contractors. So we ourselves are not installers. We hire an engineering, procurement, and construction company to build the plants on our behalf. But in the contract that we have with the EPC contractor, we basically set milestones for them and bonus payments for them in the event that they meet these milestones. The other thing that the IDB did was to say, look, it's not just about numbers. We don't want to see all the women basically cleaning the toilet. We want to see women in roles where they're actually doing something. So they've actually specified that it has to be in value added roles within construction. So whether they're on the construction site, assembling things, or for instance, or even the health and safety, you know, because environmental health and safety is a big part of you know, the initiatives that behind a number of DFIs. So if our health and safety manager is a woman, we get basically a point for that. That goes towards that percentage of the workforce. But really, they want to see women in value add roles where they're actually involved in the installation and construction or operation of the plant. The second milestone that they've put in place is that we have to hire a minimum, in the case of our project, 2 female interns. Which is great. And we actually, good news is we've actually just shortlisted a few female interns, and they have to come from a STEM background, so science, technology, engineering. So because they're really trying to encourage women. I think this is kind of, Belinda, you mentioned this with the, kind of getting away from saying an electrician cannot be a woman, an engineer cannot be a woman. So really they're trying to encourage us to train and to give exposure, kind of real world exposure to women who are in university, who have already chosen this path, but perhaps want to get that hands-on experience, right? It's one thing to do it in the classroom. It's a whole different ballgame to actually do it on the building site and seeing things happen. And I think part of the reason why they want it as well is because I am a female founder. How great is that to see, as a young woman in university, see that actually the person leading this effort is also a woman, and I'm also from the Caribbean. I am Jamaican. I guess, Nicole, you're also Jamaican as well. So that is also a big plus. The other thing they've included, so you can see the IDB really took this quite seriously, a number of things we have to achieve, is we have to train a certain number of women. So not only are we having formal internships for university students, we also have to endeavor in a formal training where they get some form of certification or skill set at the end of that training. And again, they verify that by virtue of numbers, photographs, training, and exit interviews as well from the participants in that training. And last but not least, we're not just focused on the women, but we also have to focus on the overall, corporate structure, which includes men. So our EPC contractor, EPCs tend to be quite male dominated. Even though I did on a former panel come across a woman-led EPC out of the Philippines, and I was very impressed by that lady. But anyway, so our EPC contractor needs to complete what they call the WEP gender analysis tool. So they have to complete it under the supervision effectively of either ourselves or either a member of DEACN or IDB. And then it's not that we get incentives based on what they score. It's just for them to go through that process, right? For them to have a sense of what their baseline is and see where they currently are and see where they could be. How do you improve that score? So the EPC contractor needs to complete the WEP gender analysis tool. And last but not least, because of course there's more, we also have to put in place a sexual harassment policy for the workplace. So DEACN helped to, actually, to be honest with you, they drafted the entire thing for us. I could take credit for their work, but really they took the lead on that, drafted it, walked us through it. And that's something that at our company, we decided to embrace and to basically take on board the policy that they put in place. But not only for us, but we also in the contract, and again, this is trying to kind of put teeth into it, right? So it's one thing to say, we'd really like if you guys kind of did this, let's shake hands on it. No, we're going to sign contract on it, where there's also compensation involved. So the EPC contractor has to they're obliged to do one of two things. Either they put in place their own workplace sexual harassment policy, which is satisfactory to the lenders, or they agree to comply with our policy, which we attach as an appendix to the EPC contract. So it's very, very clear, black and white, as to what we're looking for them to achieve. So I'll kind of pause there and just see if there are any questions. But that was basically kind of an overview of how the banks, how the funding, how the money is now driving this change and encouraging the change. And to be honest, to be fair, our contractor, they actually are looking to embrace it. And I don't want to say it's maybe because their lawyer is a woman, but she was super, super excited when we were putting all these things in place. She's like, don't tell them, but I'm actually really excited that you've asked us to do this. So anyway, so Nicole, I hope that helps to answer the question.
Well, I see Inka shaking her head. I mean, this is a kind of multiplier effect we're looking for, right, Inka? Absolutely.
I'm in heaven.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure we can bring that forward as a best practice. Thank you very much for that, Angelo. And we are going to have an opportunity now to hear from Laura. Laura Latti is the impact manager with Camco. And she has been focusing on development and management of climate change mitigation actions, both with public and private sector clients. We heard Ambassador Blackman speak about the importance of PPP. And so welcome to the discussion, Laura. And what we are going to be hearing from Laura is a bit more of the focus on the role of the funders. So we heard from Angela on the, fantastic work that they're doing once they've received the parameters on the financing, to look and ensure a gender lens. And now we're going to hear from Laura from bringing to us the funder's perspective. And can you say, Laura, from your perspective, what do you think that there is sufficient attention currently being given to gender equality in the funding space? That's a loaded question. We'll be here for hours. And what's needed to improve the situation?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the intro. So yeah, I think I would like to start with saying, I guess we have heard it already, there is some paradigm shift that is happening. So I think from looking at from funding perspective, I think over the past few years, there's been a lot of increasing focus from funders in towards diversity in general, whether we're talking about racial or gender equality. So this is becoming a bigger and bigger topic, and there is more focus, which is really great. If we look at energy sector and development finance that has been directed to energy sector, the amount of funding that has specific gender objectives has about doubled in over the past 10 years, which is great. It sits somewhere around 15 billion US dollars currently. So there is definitely, we are moving to the right direction. Having said that, if we look at the estimates about the global gender financing gap that exists alone in the formal sector, it sits somewhere around 300 billion US dollars. If we talk about the funding gap to climate finance and renewable energy, that sits according IPCC in trillions. So yes, there is a shift, but far more financing is needed. And as Ambassador Blackman stated in his keynote, women are the most vulnerable to climate change, and about 80% of the displaced people will be women or anticipated to be women due to climate change. So far more funding is definitely needed to this in order to build resilience and mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And then perhaps to your second point, Nicole, how to improve it. So I think Angela already covered very key points. So we work with our investee companies in somewhat similar way. We have an outcomes-based initiative model, which I think works greatly in the space, especially when you're trying to bring more into female employees, female management teams, or even on the community level stakeholder engagement. So I think any kind of outcome-based incentive structures, whether it's reducing your interest rates or providing additional bonuses or funding when you receive certain milestones, I think that is important and something I would recommend for the funding sector in general. Basically result-based finance. And then I think technical assistance support is also very much needed. Whether we're talking about clean energy in general, bringing clean energy to new markets where they haven't been, productive use of energy appliances, which can, especially in the community level, improve women's livelihood. This is often where there isn't sufficient proof of concept evidence yet in place. So I think this is something where funding is needed. Belinda talked about the importance of access to electricity in terms of getting access to information. I think this is very crucial. Again, if we don't think about it from climate change perspective, it's all important to have access to early warning systems, whether it's weather data for agriculture or access to markets. So I think that this is something where technical assistance can play a role. And therefore, I think blended finance is needed to have this kind of element built into the type of projects we fund in the new markets. And then finally, I think I would just say collaboration, which is also something Ambassador Blackman mentioned. So whether it's within the funding space or generally knowledge sharing, how we go about these things, how we fund, and how we can improve the situation. I think that would be my main points to start with. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Laura. Well, this is a thing, you know, everywhere. I mean, I'm sure we found all the speakers and the participants here. You know, it always comes down to how can we don't need to foster, we need to effect and actually put into practice those public-private partnerships, right? Because there is a lot of best practice that's out there. There is a lot of, I think, general knowledge of what the constraints and the challenges are. And although this discussion here is specific to small island developments, developing states, I think that we will find that there are a lot of similarities across, you know, other markets as well. Albeit there is the significant opportunity, for instance, the fact that clean energy represents just 6% of the total energy generation in the Caribbean now. And it would be interesting to hear from Inka or Belinda what that situation, or yourself, Laura, what is the percentage of that in the Pacific Islands. Can I ask, I know this is not one of the set questions, but I just wanted to continue on what the speakers were saying. So can I ask you to speak a bit to that, Inko?
I don't have those figures on the top of my head.
Sure.
Certainly, I mean, there's a huge energy access gap, and predominantly in rural areas. It also kind of really talks about, if we're talking about existing predominantly on-grid infrastructure, or, you know, mini grids, which can be on-grid, but the more kind of decentralized energy systems and the off-grid solar technologies. One thing that I can add to it is I work a lot with helping scale renewables and putting in place the government processes. So basically getting them used to the idea that there's, you know, various socioeconomic benefits in terms of establishing targets across the value chains. So getting them to think about that. Also the local development benefits. Depending on the size of the projects, I think there's a lot of missed opportunities there when there's corporate social responsibility aspects, and passing those down to the EPCs. I work a lot with EPCs, so I'm so excited that you found the EPCs you have, Angela, and that you've passed those on. A lot of opportunities there in terms of on-site learning, but you have to put those safeguards in place in terms of, you know, GBV, safe transport, the skills development. You know, South Africa has done a lot of that work. So, you know, recently had a conversation where they now have women, you know, getting commercial licenses to transport wind turbines from port to site, and before they weren't doing those kind of long distance haul drives. So really concentrated efforts. You know, you have your targets maybe on renewable energy and what you're trying to achieve, but then really the backbone of that in terms of the socioeconomic benefits, where really on gender equality, there's such untapped opportunities. So not answering your question, but making a pitch for that government strategy to feed down to the project developers, the contractors, and the IPP process that comes with that, and the bidding negotiations, where that all needs to be put in place and budgeted and staffed.
So being an optimist, I'm hearing the sky is quite high, that opportunity is there, and we need to, of course, both being mindful of the constraints that we have in the island states, maybe in terms of the pool of talent that's available, maybe in terms of the training opportunities that may be available, but through this type of network and the work that CAMCO and TWIX Collaborative is doing, it's very clear that there's also the opportunity for engagement with initiatives like yourself. And in future, we also need to have more male speakers, you know, because I find that a lot of times, because we're speaking about issues that may be specific to women, you know, maybe the men don't feel too comfortable. But I know that our gender champion, Ambassador Blackman, is working working hard on making sure that that changes. So I have the opportunity now to bring back to the floor Yeva. Thank you very much for this very rich and robust discussion. And Yeva is going to take us into another part of the session this evening, this morning, right, Belinda?
Hi, thanks, Nicole. And really a brilliant discussion. Thank you to all the speakers. I wanted to suggest that we actually stay in the same room. So we had a plan to split into different groups. But I think the discussion here is so diverse and I wouldn't want to lose the different speaker perspectives as well. So I think we'll just ask our brilliant IT manager if he could enable everyone. So maybe it will take us a few moments, but we'll allow everyone now to have their mics and cameras and be able to join into the discussion. I've literally already been receiving messages from different people saying how excited they are by this discussion and by it being so both visionary and practical. And I think this is what we really like as well. Let's try to bring in more diverse perspectives. So if anyone here would like to, first of all, I think share their ideas or thoughts about what you've heard, maybe we can just open up the floor with that. If anyone would like to be the first one. And if not, then I'm sure that Nicole and Laura and I and everyone can also just throw in some more questions for the speakers and also for any participants to jump in as well. So I think everyone should now be able to unmute themselves and also switch on their cameras if you like. Yeah, as I say, particularly interested to hear specifically about either challenges or solutions for the SIDS specifically, but also perhaps there's a bigger point of discussion of how specific these are, or how transcendent they are across the different geographies. Maybe that's something that Inka could actually answer since she's been working in the different regions. Yeah, so enough from me. I think I'd really like to invite anyone who would like to jump in to share perhaps their thoughts about what they've heard or how they are experiencing this in their everyday work. And Ilham was the first one to join, so why don't you jump on board?
Thank you so much.
And please introduce yourself as well.
Enjoyed this webinar. My name is Ilham Talab and I work with Get Invest. We are a European program that supports companies access finance, and also we provide a suite of financial advisory services for free because we are publicly funded thanks to the donors. And we also work a lot with CAMCO, we coordinate with them. So we're very happy to be part of this discussion. And my comment is more of a comment actually. And I think it touches on the last sentence that Eva, you mentioned, that these challenges are really transcendent in the whole sector, because I was just reading an article the other day about how very little funding is going to women-led companies in Africa in all tech industry. So we're not only talking about energy or energy access or renewable energy, this is generally across the board. And my comment or question, I think the answer will be difficult, but is this a supply or a demand issue? Like if you would like to zoom into really what is a bottleneck here, I tend to think it's more of a bias problem. And that's why I think it's very important to have also everyone involved in this discussion, not only women discussing the problems. So I think having everyone involved in the discussion probably could be one way towards more inclusivity in the sector. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well said, Ilham. And I mean, you took the word right out of my mouth, because of course, Ambassador Blackman spoke to that very point in terms of bias. Somebody has their hand raised, but I can't see exactly who it is. I don't know if that was Ilham. You can see it, Yeva?
It's MIT Mills. So if it's a response to this question, then perhaps do come in. Otherwise, maybe we can see if any of the speakers would like to comment on the question first.
Maybe I can just start and feel free to come in. I mean, you're very right, it's bias question, but I think how you started is supplier demand is also very important. And here it comes to the education of women and kind of the role models of women, and why it's important that we have these requirements, those funders who can have these requirements, because I think it very much goes in a way that women are more likely to hire other women. So whether it's into the team or generally as a funder, female funder, you are more likely to fund a woman. So I think it starts from that educational issue, obviously, and then if we can build it into the structure, the more the situation will improve. That would be my input. Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe Nicole, just quickly, because I am a female founder and I have raised money, and I've also worked with women who are younger women who come up to me and say, "How did you do that? Like, how did you?" I mean, the first deal that I worked on in the end, it was basically we raised $65 million to invest in a solar farm in Jamaica. I've just raised 24 million from IDB and I raised 4 million from Deakin. And the reality is, I think you're right. It's a bit of both. It's a combination of women being out there looking to raise, but then also the bias is there. But I will say that from our perspective as women, I think we should also be a lot more confident in ourselves. Absolutely. And being willing to go out there and take that risk. I think gender bias historically, and I guess I'm a bit older than you, but normally there's that. I think men tend to have more circumstances where they're used to getting rejected, where they're expected to go out there and ask questions. You can ask someone on a date and they may say no. So you have that you're basically desensitized a little bit more than you are in the traditional female model. And so when you go to raise money, you're very much vulnerable, right? You're putting yourself out there for that no. And I think if we, as we start to just, kind of remove a lot of those gender biases in terms of the lens, that we ourselves become a bit more comfortable with being out there and expecting. I mean, I'm not only a woman, but I'm also a Black woman, right? So that percent of funding is really, 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 really low. And so any advice I give to women who are looking to raise money, I say, look, number one is you have to believe in you, because with any kind of entrepreneur, male or female, if you don't believe in yourself, it's very hard to make that pitch to get someone to be willing to write that check.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Maybe Anaiti, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right, but why don't you jump in whether it was a question related to this one or something else?
Well, hi everyone. I'm sorry I cannot turn on my camera. I'm getting ready to go to the airport, but I didn't want to miss this debate. And thank you, Nicole, and the organization for inviting me to participate. I am happy to see people that I admire here on the panel that I have interacted. My name is Anaite Mills, and I am the chair of the Jamaica Energy Resilience Alliance. I represent a consultancy firm in the US specialized in energy and environment, Cadmus Group. The Jamaica Energy Resilience Alliance was created under a USAID funded project. I don't want to go too much into the details of the project itself, because that's not this is not my forum. But I wanted to tackle a couple of things that I heard. I think everybody said a lot of things that can be used and valued and should be deconstructed for different, forums, for different audiences. And there is a responsibility that we have in the sector as women that are advancing certain areas of the renewable energy or the energy sector to create those spaces where we can mentor more younger people, not saying that we're not young, but younger people, junior people, women that, that really want to get into the sector. So we need to create more spaces in which we extend the audience beyond the people that we know, beyond the network, but even with in partnership with academic institutions and with other associations that have community, engagement and are involved in local participation and local action. The Caribbean, in my experience, and this is very aligned with what Angela is saying, is not short of women who feel motivated, eager and confident to get into the energy sector. Under the Jamaica Energy Resilience Alliance, we are implementing a workforce development component with the University of West Indies, and we have trained around 60 students into photovoltaics and installing energy, solar energy. About 25 were female students. We conducted a few interviews just to get a little bit of sense of what drive them into going into the energy sector. And, I was pleasantly surprised at the consistent theme with a few of these highly, successful students, female students, was that, they felt confident. They felt like they belonged to the space. They had no issues or no doubts about themselves. I think to a certain extent, they even kind of were saying it out loud to say it to themselves that they were not, that they needed and belonged where they were. What they did raise is the bias. The moment when they step into a business to talk about solar energy, the reaction from men, the reaction from male-owned businesses, the reaction from peers, that kind of skepticism of, is she going to say anything reasonable or useful or not? And we were, talking, you just have to push forward. You have to own the space and take it. And as we continue to work, there's a lot of education and awareness that needs to happen. Something that I like about the USAID model, and this is a model that is not, unfortunately, is not widely used globally, is the Global Development Alliance, which brings private sector to leverage one-on-one development finance, but also brings in academic institutions, trade associations, private sector, small trainers. It brings a lot of different people, and that goes back to what you were saying, my colleague before, about bringing everybody to the conversation, sitting with the finance sector, because I heard from a female, very successful female entrepreneur here in Jamaica that she was afraid to going into the bank. She was afraid to go into the bank. She didn't want to take any loans, anything. She paid everything cash. And if she can finance it, she doesn't get it. And that includes solar. And we cannot have that. We are not in a time where we can allow that. So we need to sit with the financial sector. I'm going to stop right there. And thank you so much for the space.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much for that. That contribution, Anita, and I'm glad you were able to join us. Especially you touched on the last point, which is access to finance. So we hear about the success, and I think we will find that we have another session where we can drill down specifically on some of the the best practices from the access to finance, and especially with the colleagues from 2X Collaborative. We have a number of entities here, and you spoke, Laura, specifically to the importance of ensuring blended finance, right? Clearly, there needs to be a paradigm shift within the mindset of those which in the financial sector are having somewhat of inroads within the Caribbean, with more women being in the financial sector. I think there's a lot of excitement about women being at the CEO level, but it doesn't mean that mindsets have been shifted. So it's very interesting what you're saying, Anita and other colleagues, about, just realize that the bias is going to be there. You know yourself, you know your work technically. We have some colleagues, and CESO is making some excellent contributions. We have some colleagues that I think have been doing a lot working on the financial side of things, and I told them that I'm going to be calling on them. We have Loretto Duffy Mayers, who is from PFAN. We also have Ingrid Chu from CEF. So I'd love to invite you or any other colleagues who are also here who can speak to some of what Laura was touching on in terms of the importance of taking a blended finance approach, just in terms of whether, you know, what your organization has been, what your company has been doing, or where you see that there are any opportunities. I'm not seeing those mics getting opened up as yet. So
yes, good morning all. Loretto Duffy Mears. Look, my apologies, but I am suffering from some kind of flu. It's not COVID, but it is putting terrible strain on my vocal cords right now. And you most certainly don't want to see me. I look absolutely dreadful at the moment. So, but yes, I've been following the discussion with great interest. I am based in Barbados, but I do cover the Caribbean region. You know, trying to get finance from the banking system in the Caribbean is an absolute nightmare. Yes, believe it or not, there are more women managers nowadays than there are male managers in the commercial banking sector. But the way the banks are structured nowadays, bank managers are really nothing more than supervisors. So no matter what, who you speak to, you know, at the end of the day, it's somebody in Canada is making most of the decisions as to what sort of loans go out, you know. And while they all claim to have somebody who specializes in energy, the reality of it is that no matter what sort of projects you go to them with, their responses tend to be, oh, well, these things never really work out the way they say they do. So, you know, I do think that commercial banking is really still is pretty much of a loss for most entrepreneurs, never mind whether you're men or women, right? And that's one of the reasons why I think something like PFAN is such a good support mechanism, private financing network. And I've given the, it's very simple, pfan.net, that looks at all sorts of projects, as long as they are energy efficiency, renewable energy, climate related, but with a really strong emphasis on gender, and offers, you know, free business coaching and investment facilitation to entrepreneurs, male and female, developing climate and clean energy projects in, in the Caribbean. It's global, but I mean, I'm focusing on the Caribbean. So we're looking to build clean energy markets, mitigate climate change, and mobilize private investment in support of the Paris Agreement. So I would be very happy to hear from anybody who is looking for financing and looking for even just general, you know, advice. We can, and I am working with a project in Jamaica right now, a hotel project that's looking to go completely renewable. And that's the kind of projects that I would mainly be trying to focus on, anything that's energy related, but very interested in the gender aspect of it. So please feel free to contact me. I can leave my email address in the chat there for anybody who's interested in following up. And thank you for inviting me. And so far, it's been an excellent discussion.
Great. Thanks for that, Loretto. Yevo?
I was checking if anyone else has any hands up, but if not, then I was wondering if I could ask Inka. I'm really interested in the project that you're working on at the moment in the Pacific. So maybe bringing this slightly back to the Pacific, but also I think relevant for the Caribbean region as well as perhaps other regions too. It's the importance of sort of doing a baseline assessment, I guess. This is something that the ambassador, I think, was trying to bring forward in the form of energy audits, or audits within the energy space, maybe gender audits within the energy space rather, where sort of, how important it is to have this baseline assessment. And do you think that at the moment this is something that is missing? Because I do have to admit that when we started researching for this particular part of the series, so focusing on the SIDS, and started speaking to a number of different people, both from the government and the private sector, I have to admit that, they were from the energy sector, not gender-specific experts. And it seemed like we were actually bringing this subject to their desk, to some of them for the first time. So I do wonder, you know, where do you think the sort of the knowledge levels currently lie? And if we don't understand the key challenges, then how can we change them, right? So it's, yeah, the question is sort of along these lines.
Great. I'll jump in and then others will have to come. I just wanted to mention on the supply and demand aspect, and also what Loreto said, a lot of the work I do in Ethiopia is through development banks and the credit lines that provide financing to female entrepreneurs and male entrepreneurs, but also the on financing for consumers. So the user experience is huge. The requirements we set, you know, in terms of track record, financial performance, etc. Banks are usually very risk adverse, and all of this has been said. But also banks think that people have immense amount of time, and they don't. So really thinking about those labor and time burdens that women still shoulder in every economy in the world. So really thinking how indulgent those systems are, how many cycles of reviews do we need to go through to kind of become a customer. And I think, you know, we should be flipping this in terms of there's a huge market segment of talent and resources and innovation that banks are not accessing. So thinking also through, you know, 2X is being transformative on that front in terms of making that finance available. In terms of the Pacific and data, yes, this is a huge this is a huge challenge. It's not just it's also the access to data, it's the level of detail, and then it's the sector specific information that's available. The World Bank has supported since 2017 work with the Pacific Power Association. So there was really in-depth work on looking at gender norms, employment data across all those utilities that are part of that. So I encourage you to go to their website. They have a whole gender portal, and there's also been cross-regional exchange with getting champions to, you know, fly to other countries in South Asia, for example, and exchange on ideas. I think there's been really amazing developments in terms of collaboration in terms of the policy space. So I know that there's really strong, you know, work by the Pacific Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency and the Pacific Energy and Gender Network. They have policies and strategies which do feature data, but maybe that's kind of, you know, other stakeholders need to make that linkage to companies that are coming in. I don't currently, you know, in the bid process, or, you know, when you're tendering, getting to know the companies that want to come in, what do those local partnerships look like? Because there's also a huge case to be made to capacitating, you know, local content, companies that could, you know, take on certain tenders. Often, you know, you really need to structure your deals differently. You also need to maybe divide contracts differently, and you need to do all of that legwork through data collection and assessments before you set those, you know, non-price factors. You can't just say 30% female-led firms need to capture X bid value of a contract without, you know, setting those requirements. I've worked with governments, you know, Kenya's had procurement targets like that in the geothermal sector, and then they haven't met them. But I would argue they're not being met because there's a lack of supply of talent, but more that the business development, the procurement systems haven't been looked at more closely. And I think in the Pacific, certainly a lot more data collection and on the ground assessments need to happen, and you need to pay attention to those dynamics in terms of international companies, but also local players. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, that's great. Laura, I can see that you have your hand up as well.
Yes, I noticed there was also another hand, but maybe because this relates to more from the funder's perspective to the data issue. So I just wanted to kind of highlight the importance in this, because from funder's perspective, you obviously want to see the what the outcome is that you are funding. So the same way we want to know how many tons of CO2 we are reducing, or how many households we are connecting. We now want to know how many female customers do those off-grid facilities have, if there is specific productive use of energy equipment funded, how that helps, how can we quantify how it helps women's livelihood. But this is again another element where the kind of technical assistant type of funding, if it's available, is of course very important in building that that monitoring system. And maybe just one last point to add from data perspective. This is more coming back to Ambassador Blackman's reference to the audit, gender audit, but I'm thinking more from the reporting perspective. Again, that currently we obviously have the 2X collaborative that has come with certain kind of criteria and indicator, and they have worked together with the Global Impact Investing Network with the IRIS Plus. But currently, there is not really an agreed set of metrics that should be reported and followed. So this is also a new field to consider in terms of reporting. That's from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Don't know if anyone else wants to add anything to that point, but if not, I can see that Thalo has their hand up, and I think you posted something in the chat before, which was quite thought-provoking, which is something along the lines of, if you show confidence, then that might get you even more challenges. So maybe you would like to elaborate on that point.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies, for the platform. My name is Maki from Sunflower Energy Africa in Johannesburg, South Africa. I have been in the space for quite some time, started doing residential installation with the Department of Energy, doing solar water geysers, and eventually we pivoted into the residential electrification. And in my view and my experience currently, the renewable energy contributes relatively little to the primary energy and even less to the consumption of residential energy, whereby homeowners could be benefiting from self-consumption and exporting excess energy back to the grid. I'm currently sitting in the dark right now in Johannesburg in Centurion. We are experiencing load shedding, and there is so much excess of roof space that is idling that we could be using to do residential installation. And because most of the finances or the government, I'm not sure, but I've been struggling to get my message to get through that, that there are opportunities all over. We do not have to really look into all this big scale project. There are other parts of the space that we can concentrate on, and it's just something that is not getting any joy, and I'm trying to drive that with my colleagues around here. That look, let's power our own house. Let's create our own homes into mini power station, and by the time when policies have changed, and the utility allows to buy back from us, then we can be able to contribute with the excess energy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Selo, and the discussion, Yeva. I just want to pick up on one point, Yeva, that I think we've heard as a strand in addition to the other challenges and considerations. We heard Belinda in terms of speak about what was happening in terms of the island context vis-a-vis the importance of education, but really speaking to the need for that talent pipeline. You touched on it also, Laura, Annette spoke to it, Inka, and of course Angela has given us some examples of how the current work that you're doing, Angela, is actually facilitating that talent, approaches to addressing that talent pipeline. It seems to me that it's very clear, especially in an island state context, or groups of islands, that it's something that we would definitely need to ensure that the platforms and the spaces are there, such as what you're doing here today, Yeva and Laura, you know, to be speaking about this. I think, you know, the next time around, I would say, you know, we have to make sure that we're doing a specific outreach at the university and vocational training institutes. I'm sure you know of a number of different initiatives. You know, there's an initiative called the WIRE Initiative, Women in Renewable Energy, that was started by the Clinton Foundation in the Caribbean region, which I think is one of those avenues that you know, is a, I don't know if it's a feeder ground, but it's an opportunity. Angela, you seem to, I'm sure you know about it and that kind of thing. And it's probably the kind of thing that, especially in island state contexts, you know, it's so important in terms of becoming part of that that ecosystem, that pool of persons that, for instance, in the case of what Inka and Belinda are speaking about in the Pacific, you know, that you can have the talent that can be supporting other initiatives in other parts of the country. So I just wonder if Angela and Belinda, if you could speak a little bit to that, if you think that that type of thing in terms of, you know, the building that talent pipeline, which is part of my lingua also. That's what I do with Girls in Technology for my NGO. But, you know, if we don't have that, we're never going to have women in leadership in renewable energy sector. So, Angela, if you can just speak a bit to that, and then
Sure.
Belinda, it would be great to get your perspective on that too.
Sure. No, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think the pipeline is absolutely crucial. You know, I'll pick up on even one of the earlier questions, going back to that questions about the bias around funding, right? And I think, unfortunately, this is not just, this is human nature. I don't think it's male or female or anything in between. I think until you've seen it, it's hard to have faith in that it can be done. Right. So there's just this natural inhibition to believe that if this is what I'm used to seeing that. Until I see it being done differently, then it's a little bit hard for you to kind of get your head around the unknown. And just quickly, like in my own experience, when I won the first project, because there's a government tender in Jamaica, I was having dinner with a friend and he overheard a couple gentlemen talking, believe it or not, about me, a bunch of gas guys. And they're like, yeah, she's really young. She's super naive. Oh, that project will never be built. You know, it's a fluke, etc. And so I walked over and being me, I said, hi. I was like, hey, how are you guys doing? Because I knew one of the guys. I'd already met him in a professional context. He was super nice to me in front of me, but behind my back, he's there basically belittling me to a bunch of other guys, how naive and young I am, right? Naive, you know, it's very, I think men sometimes use that a lot about women to say you're naive, right? And so I was very, very happy to almost want to invite them to the opening of the project, of the plant, because the way in which his mindset was framed that, oh, she will never do this because it hasn't been done. But the next time he comes across a young, naive woman, I think he's going to take her a little bit more seriously because it's been done before. So that's why that pipeline and trailblazing is so critical for that change, in my opinion.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Angela. Belinda?
Yeah, I agree. The Vanuatu, there's a lot of places without electricity, a lot of homes, a lot of schools, health clinics. We find that we install off-grid solar systems in clusters. One person's house, they will get it, and then the next house, and then the next house. They call each other, I got a rice cooker, and this is what it does. Do you know, like, I've got lights, the kids can study at night. Do you know, like, they share that information. It's the same as, you know, the study pipeline. Get one woman in the village, you know, like just to get to university, to do year 10, do year 11, to be able to read, to do an online course. It just opens a door. Wow, you can do this. I can do that too. They've got their sister. I just asked them, how did you get there? What was the link? How do I use the computer? What does your solar system do? And it's just teaching each other, and we just spread that awareness and educate slowly.
Yeah.
But it's one step at a time. Teach each other to read, teach each other to get there.
Yeah, I think we have so many best practices. I mean, not only in this group, but you know, it's a matter of getting that information out there. You know, I mean, I remember being at a meeting, a CGI meeting in the Caribbean, and you know, they had women, I guess I don't know what you call them, electrical pole climbers, right? But they were the technicians who are women in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico actually did a project because they started out saying, well, you know, they're like, no women who are climbing the electrical poles because women don't do that. And then now they have an entire association with like over 500 women who are doing this. And I'm here thinking, well, why aren't we doing this in the rest of the Caribbean islands? Because we have women in construction and that kind of thing. So I think part of what's really amazing with this platform that you've provided today, Yeva and Laura, is that, and with Jessica from 2X, you know, is that these kind of best practices, we have to make sure that across all categories that we're sharing that information, even if it's in sound bites, you know, from whether or not it's solar powered individual off-grid systems, you know, or it's, you know, as Hilla was saying, you know, it don't only have to be the bigger operations, but we do also need to have the evidence of the bigger operations, because we do need to have those women in leadership who clearly are going to be the ones supported by the male gender champions to be opening the doors. And with that, I'm done. I want to say mic drop the mic. I dropped the mic. Over to you, Yeva.
Well, not much to add, maybe, but yeah, and we're 3 minutes over time. It has been a brilliant discussion, and I think we definitely need more of those to start, you know, breaking the boundaries and breaking the barriers and getting across to the different kinds of people. So the governments, the private sector, you know, the funders, the developers, you name it. Partnerships are important, and we all need to be speaking the same language and thinking in the same direction. So thank you very much to the brilliant panel, Inka, Angela, Belinda, for waking up or not going to sleep, I'm not sure, your time, and Laura and Nicole, and of course, Ambassador Blackman, for the brilliant discussion today. Thanks again, and thank you for everyone for joining, and those who braved and engaged in the discussion. We are really excited about this and hoping that we can spread these messages further as we go along. Let's keep up the good work.